The Mana series has a long and storied history with humble beginnings back on the little Game Boy, and there are just like a ton of games in this series, so it can be hard to keep track of them all. But in today's video, I just kind of want to go over what the Mana series is all about to get you prepared for what's sure to be the game of the summer, Visions of Mana, releasing in just about a week or so. And I do think that is worth a sub as I try my hardest to get to 100,000 subscribers. And with your help, your like, and your sub, I do know that I can get there. Thank you so much for that, and now let's deep dive into the history of one of my favorite action RPG series of all time. One thing that you do need to keep in mind is that the games are not direct sequels to one another, so you don't have to play them in any type of particular order to understand what's going on. However, much like Final Fantasy, they do share some common themes, such as bright, colorful graphics, whimsical, fun, upbeat music, tons of different weapons to play around with, multiple party members, 8 different elemental spirits, and an offbeat, humorous story that doesn't take itself too seriously, as you play as the chosen hero who frees the Sword of Mana and then makes their way over to the Mana Tree to restore balance to the world. Personally, I first got into the Mana series back when Final Fantasy Adventure, or Mystic Quest as it was known in Europe, was released for the Game Boy. Back then, I had no idea that it was actually part of the Mana series. I just thought that it was like an action RPG spin-off of the traditional turn-based Final Fantasy series. So it really wasn't until the advent of the internet came around that I realized that Final Fantasy Adventure was really the very first entry into the Mana series. And here, you can tell that the series is still trying to find its footing. In fact, many of the things that we associate with Mana were not in the first game at all. You had one character to directly control. However, other guest party members would join up with you to help out as the story dictated. This was a little powerhouse gem on the Game Boy, as you had 8 useful spells and tons of different weapons to utilize, each with different abilities, like the axe that you could throw across the screen, or the sickle that swung all the way around your hero. Also, every time that you gained a level, you also got a skill point, so you could build up your hero any which way that you wanted, and each playthrough was different. While the first game was obviously more on the simpler side, in 2003 on the Game Boy Advance, Sword of Mana was released as a complete remake of the original game, and this incorporated Mana staples into that original game, such as the elemental spirits and the ring weapon system. Not only that, but tons of replay value was added too, as you can play through as either the hero or the heroine to experience 2 completely different stories and playstyles. Then, even later on down the line in 2016 for the PS Vita, Adventures of Mana was released, as yet another remake of the original game. This one was much truer to the original though, as it dropped many of the changes introduced in Sword of Mana, such as the dual playthroughs, and it upgrades the battle system of the original game and colorizes it as well. So, there are 3 different ways to play the original game in the series, and each are definitely unique enough to warrant their own playthrough. It's a super fun game, and it's not all that long either, but it really wouldn't be until the next game in the series, Secret of Mana, that the Mana series' identity would be firmly established. Secret of Mana was the game that firmly entrenched the series into all of our collective gamer consciousnesses, mostly because it really brought the world to life. Series staples are introduced, such as 3-person parties, this time consisting of the boy, Randy, who's your best physical fighter, the girl, Prim, your healer, and the sprite, your attack mage. What's really neat about it is that you can switch around to control any one of them at any time while utilizing all the different weapons that the world has to offer. And just like in the previous game, some weapons help you traverse terrain. Like here you can use the axe to bust down some rocks, or you can use the whip to cross gaps. Leveling up also works differently, as skill point allocation was dropped in favor of individual weapon and spell leveling. After each boss battle, you'll gain weapon orbs to power up your weapons, and whenever you reach a new mana shrine, you're able to seal the mana seed, thus upgrading your magic and also gaining new elemental spirits who then bestow their magical powers upon you. And the more that you use your weapons and your spells, the more powerful that they would become. Other staples are introduced here, such as Flammy, the White Dragon, and cannon travel to blast you from town to town. Secret of Mana is an absolute classic and was even remade for the PS4 in 2018, where voice acting and in-skits were introduced, further fleshing out the classic story. Now, for Trials of Mana, the 3rd game in the series, this originally came out in the Super Famicom over in Japan, but it wasn't officially released here in the West until quite recently, where it's actually available in its original form in the Collection of Mana. Or, if you would like, you can choose to play its fantastic remake. Either way is a winner, because this here is what Mana is all about. What's cool about this one is that it takes everything that made Secret of Mana so special, cut out the weapon and magic grinding, and added in tons more customization, heroes, and world building. Instead of being forced to use the same 3 characters, you're given the choice to create a party of 3 heroes out of a possible 6, each with different storylines, objectives, bosses, and endings. And each hero has their own playstyle, from the mages, Angel and Charlotte, to the warriors, Durin and Reese, over to the more off-kilter characters like Kevin the Beastman or the Thief Hulk. Harkening back to the first game, the skill point allocation system is back whenever you gain levels, and the world feels much more alive as you're introduced to the many kingdoms, colorful characters, and memorable scenes all throughout the world. Further adding to the great replay value, a class-changing system is introduced, and you can choose whether you want your character to side with the light or the dark sides, with each path promising different abilities, spells, ultimate attacks, and stat growths. I adore this game, and I think that I'm in good company too, as many people say that it's easily the best game in the series, so I'd definitely check it out if I were you. I alluded to this earlier, but something to note is that the first 3 games in the series have all been bundled together and released as the Collection of Mana, which is just a great way to get you caught up on the series, making them incredibly accessible. Just do be aware that this collection is only the original versions of the first 3 games, not the remakes. So if you want to see where the seminal series originated, look no further than this collection. With the advent of the PlayStation, we have the first spin-off to the Mana series, Legend of Mana. As a spin-off, they did try a lot of different things, as you control an unnamed hero or heroine as they set out to restore the Tree of Mana. You see, prior to the events of the game, the Mana Tree was almost entirely burned down, and a war erupted between the fairies, humans, elves, and other factions over the remaining power of mana. And it's now your job to unseal the lands trapped in the ancient artifacts and restore the power of mana. And you're going to be doing this by completing a whole bunch of different interrelated quests. This could almost be like the Saga game of the Mana series, because of just how open-ended and non-linear it is. Most of the time, you're not alone though, as you can be assisted by up to 2 different companions, one being a support character who kind of comes along for the ride during the quest of the day, and the other companion being chosen from a roster of monsters and pets. As you collect the artifacts, you'll use the land make system to generate regions and quests, and each land tells its own unique standalone story. Don't worry though, because as you progress, these standalone stories will begin to present a cohesive narrative, finally merging into larger quest arcs. Just like the previous games in the series, this system allows for a ton of replayability simply because of the unique nature of its storytelling. And just like the first 3 games in the series, this is available on modern consoles as it was recently remastered. So it's pretty easy to check it out for yourself, especially if you like side-scrolling action games. Because of the success of Legend of Mana, the developers decided to continue with another spin-off, this time with Children of Mana, over on the Nintendo DS. This is much more of like a pick-up-and-play type of game, as you crawl through dungeons and progress by completing randomly generated levels. Interestingly though, both Children of Mana and the next game released, Dawn of Mana, share the same world. And just a few years before the events of the game, a great disaster took place at the base of the Mana Tree. However, 2 young heroes used the Sword of Mana to save the world from that disaster. Here, you play as one of 4 different orphans, sent out to investigate the disaster that took their parents' lives. Another cool thing about this is that you get to travel from continent to continent by riding Flammy between them, and then diving deeper into the dungeons, so this is definitely made for gaming on the go, and you can even hook up your DS using the Wi-Fi connection to play couch co-op with your friends. After those 2 spin-offs, the Mana series decided to go on back to the mainline games with the 4th entry into the series, Dawn of Mana, for the PS2. And this takes place in the same world as the aforementioned Children of Mana, just 10 years in the past, as this tells the origin story of both the Mana Tree and the Spirits of Mana, as a portal has opened at the base of the Mana Tree and it's spewing forth corruption to the rest of the world, so Keldric and Ritzia set forth to stop it. Just like the other games in the series, with a new game came some new changes. Here mostly with the Havoc combat system, which allowed you to use objects around the field to attack your enemies, as well as a chapter system, where your level reset back to 1 with the start of each chapter, a first and a last for the Mana series. Shortly after the release of Dawn of Mana, Square Enix decided to go on back to the Nintendo DS with their next outing, Heroes of Mana. And this time, rather than being an action RPG, we have a real-time strategy game, where you play as a young soldier, Roger, who journeys to defend several different nations from the aggression of his own country. Personally, I love some real-time strategy RPGs like Ogre Battle and the Deofield Chronicle, so I loved the little twist on the formula, and like most strategy RPGs, the story does not disappoint, as Heroes of Mana is actually a prequel to Trials of Mana, just set a few years before, and it depicts the wars between the nations in that game. And even better, some of the characters in Heroes are actually the parents of the characters in Trials. So if you're like me and you love the real-time strategy genre, there is some great Mana lore to be found here. After that, we went quite a long time without a release in the Mana series, at least in the West. That is, until a surprise announcement shocked us all, Visions of Mana. This is a true blue action RPG and the first one to be releasing on a home console since Dawn of Mana way back on the PS2. This is a true return to form in the same vein as Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana, the games that made the Mana series a household name in the first place. This here is the 5th mainline Mana game, and the original designer and director is back at the helm. Multiple party members are back as you fight together in an open region world, and you'll play as Val, a young man from the Fire Village, who's charged with accompanying his childhood friend Hina on a pilgrimage to the sacred Mana tree, along with Morley, a cat-like creature, Karina, a half-human, half-dragon hybrid, Palomena, the young queen of Illistana, and Julie, a dryad plant-like creature. This promises, again, a back-to-the-basics approach that we've seen work so well in games like Star Ocean: The Divine Force, Triangle Strategy, Octopath Traveler 2, and Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince. There's multiple weapons, tons of different spells, a really neat upgradable system too, tons of secrets and treasures to find around every corner, and a riveting story too. Flammy is back, Little Cactus is back, even Vuskov. Obviously, time will tell how this game will pan out, but I cannot wait to pop this baby into my PlayStation 5 and relive my childhood just like I did whenever I was 9 years old and I first played Final Fantasy Adventure back on my Game Boy. We've become full circle here. Because really, folks, there's nothing better than being able to relive the simpler times and magic of your childhood. And that's what long-running classic series like this allows me to do. It allows me to go on back to a simpler place in time and just relish it all. I do hope that this video has helped you wrap your head around this incredibly long-running series and understand why it's so well loved, and also why I'm just so hyped for Visions of Mana. So now, I've got to ask you, how do you feel about the Mana series, and what do you feel about Visions of Mana? Let me know in the comments, because I love hearing from you. And before you go, here's another video that I think that you're really going to love, going over everything that we know about Visions of Mana. So be sure to check that one out, and have a good day.